I'm going to pick up in our chapter called The Whistler and the Shoes, students, on page, looks like 286. Now, up to that point, this is where Rudy and Liesel decide to go on a little thieving spree. They're going to go out and steal. And they can't really figure out what they want to take. They're aimless with this. All they know is they want to go out and steal. So they've been looking around the neighborhood trying to figure out what to steal, what their goals should be, when finally they do come across at the mayor's house. This is territory that Liesel knows, so she's interested in going to the mayor's house, and she has one thing on her mind when she sees the open window. So I'm going to start there on page 286, and I will read and stop and talk. And let's see, where should we start? Oh, I know. I want you to think about for a minute before I start reading. Think about our conversation last week about kids, about especially about Rudy and Liesel stealing. Remember we talked a little about what's been taken from kids, especially kids who are in the middle of a war. All right, I'll start now. A week later, however, on their fifth visit to the upper part of Mulking, it was there. The open window breathed a slice of air in. That was all it would take. It was Rudy who stopped first. He tapped Liesel in the ribs with the back of his hand. "Is that window," he whispered, "open?" The eagerness in his voice leaned from his mouth like a forearm onto Liesel's shoulder. Listen to that language for a minute, students. The voice leaned from his mouth. Again, we have some figurative language that this writer is using there, and I want you to think about what it is. Yeah, his voice leaning. I think we've got ourselves a metaphor there, some personification. "Jawohl," she answered, "it sure is," and how her heart began to heat. On each previous occasion, when they found the window clamped firmly shut, Liesel's outer disappointment had masked a ferocious relief. Would she have had the neck to go in? And who and what, in fact, was she going in for? For Rudy to locate some food? Okay, I'm going to stop for a minute. Define that word ferocious. Ferocious means fierce or very determined. But we can tell from this part of the text that she has had a struggle with, if they go by and she has the opportunity to steal, will she have the nerve? Will she do it? No, the repugnant truth, repugnant, unacceptable, tasting bad. The repugnant truth was this: she didn't care about the food. Rudy, no matter how hard she tried to resist the idea, was secondary to her plan. It was the book she wanted, The Whistler. She wouldn't tolerate having it given to her by a lonely, pathetic old woman. Stealing it, on the other hand, seemed a little more acceptable. Stealing it, in a sick kind of sense, was like earning it. Think about that for a minute. Why is it so important to her to take the Whistler? Why that? And why there? The light was changing in blocks of shade. The pair of them gravitated toward the immaculate, bulky house. They rustled their thoughts. Let me get my cursor here. "You hungry?" Rudy asked. Liesel replied, "Starving for a book." Let's see, I think it didn't change. Oops. Now I'm on the right page. "Look, a light just came on upstairs." "I see it. Still hungry, Salmensch?" They laughed nervously for a moment before going on through the motions of who should go in and who should stand watch. As the male in the operation, Rudy clearly felt that he should be the aggressor. But it was obvious that Liesel knew this place. It was she who was going in. She knew what was on the other side of the window. She said, "It has to be me." Liesel closed her eyes tightly. She compelled herself to remember, to see visions of the mayor and his wife. She watched her gathered friendship with Ilse Hermann and made sure to see it kicked in the shins and left by the wayside. It worked. She detested them. Detested students means hated. They scouted the street and crossed the yard silently. Now they were crouched beneath the slit in the window on the ground floor. The sound of their breathing amplified. "Here," Rudy said, "give me your shoes. You'll be quieter." Without complaint, Liesel undid the worn black laces and left the shoes on the ground. Oh, I've lost my place. Just a minute here. She rose up, and Rudy gently opened the window, just wide enough for Liesel to climb through. The noise of it passed overhead like a low-flying plane. Liesel heaved herself, she lifted herself, onto the ledge and tussled her way inside. Taking off her shoes, she realized, was a brilliant idea, as she landed much heavier on the wooden floor than she'd anticipated. The soles of her feet expanded in that painful way, rising to the inside edges of her socks. The room itself was as it always was. Liesel, in the dusty dimness, shrugged off her feelings of nostalgia. Nostalgia, students, means she's remembering how much she loved being there. She has very mixed feelings about all of this. Although she says she hates them, she still, in some way, I think, cares about the mayor's wife. Oh, now I've lost my place. Where am I? The room itself was as it always was. Liesel, in the dusty dimness, shrugged off her feelings of nostalgia. She crept forward and allowed her eyes to adjust. "What's going on?" Rudy whispered sharply from outside, but she waved him a backhander that meant, "Halt, small! Keep quiet." "The food," he reminded her. "Find the food, and cigarettes, if you can." Both items, however, were the last things on her mind. She was home. She was home, among the mayor's books of every color and description, with their silver and gold lettering. She could smell the pages. She could almost taste the words as they stacked up around her. Students, think about this for a minute. She says she is home. She is in this place that has been so special for her and still, like we've talked about, in some way, still loves it. Her feet took her to the right-hand wall. She knew the one she wanted, the exact position, but when she made it to the Whistler's usual place on the shelf, it was not there. A slight gap was in its place. From above, she heard footsteps. "The light!" Rudy whispered. The words were shoved through the open window. "It's out!" "Scheisse! They're coming downstairs!" There was a giant length of a moment then, the eternity of split-second decision. Her eyes scanned the room and she could see the Whistler, sitting patiently on the mayor's desk. "Hurry up," Rudy warned her, but very calmly and cleanly. Liesel walked over, picked up the book, and made her way cautiously out. Head first, she climbed from the window, managing to land on her feet again, feeling the pang of pain once more, this time in her ankles. "Come on," Rudy implored her. "Run, run, schnell!" Once around the corner, on the road back down the river. Where am I? On the road back down the river and Munich Street, she stopped to bend over and recover. Her body was folded in the middle, the air half frozen in her mouth, her heart tolling in her ears. Rudy was the same. When he looked over, he saw the book under her arm. He struggled to speak. He grappled with the words. "What's with the book?" All right, students, stop and think about this for a minute. Rudy and Liesel have been very good friends. We've watched them grow in their friendship. But now, at this point, I think Rudy is really beginning to understand something very important about Liesel. This is where, in some ways, this is where he understands who she is. The darkness was filling up truly now. Liesel panted, the air in her throat defrosting. It was all I could find. Unfortunately, Rudy could smell it, the lie. He cocked his head and told her what he felt was a fact. You didn't go in for food, did you? You got what you wanted. Liesel straightened then and was overcome with the sickness of another realization. The shoes. She looked at Rudy's feet, then at his hands, and at the ground all around him. What? He asked. What is it? Sock girl, she accused him. Where are my shoes? Rudy's face whitened, which left her in no doubt. They're back at the house, she suggested. Aren't they? Rudy searched desperately around himself, begging against all reality that he might have brought them with him. He imagined himself picking them up, wishing it was true, but the shoes were not there. They sat uselessly, or actually much worse, incriminatingly. Incriminatingly, there's a good word for you. Incriminating means they are criminals. They are caught in their crime. So they are there, incriminatingly, by the wall at 8 Grandestrasse. Dubkopf, he admonished himself, smacking his ear. He looked down shamelessly at the sullen sight of Liesel's socks. Idiot! It didn't take him long to decide on making it right. Earnestly, he said, just wait, and he hurried back around the corner. Don't get caught, Liesel called after him, but he didn't hear. The minutes were heavy while he was gone. Darkness was now complete, and Liesel was quite certain that a Watchen was most likely in the cards when she returned home. Remember your German vocabulary here. A Watchen? She thinks she's going to get a pretty good spanking for all of this. Hurry, she murmured, but still Rudy didn't appear. She imagined the sound of a police siren throwing itself forward and reeling itself in, collecting itself. Still nothing. Only when she walked back to the intersection of the two streets in her damp, dirty socks did she see him. Rudy's triumphant face was held nicely up as he trotted steadily toward her. His teeth were gnashed into a grin, and the shoes dangled from his hand. They nearly killed me, he said, but I made it. They didn't really nearly kill him, you know that. He's teasing her. Once they'd crossed the river, he handed Liesel the shoes, and she threw them down. Sitting on the ground, she looked up at her best friend. Danke, she said. Thank you. Rudy bowed. My pleasure. He tried for a little more. No point asking if I get a kiss for that, I guess. For bringing my shoes, which you left behind? Fair enough. He held up his hands and continued speaking as they walked on, and Liesel made a concerted effort to ignore him. She only heard the last part. Probably wouldn't want to kiss you anyway, not if your breath's anything like your shoes. No, typical kid talk, isn't that? That's the way little kids talk. You disgust me, she informed him, and she hoped he couldn't see the escaped beginnings of a smile that had fallen from her mouth. On Himmel Street, Rudy captured the book. Under a lamppost, he read out the title and wondered what it was about. Dreamily, Liesel answered, Just a murderer. Is that all? There's also a policeman trying to catch him. Rudy handed it back. Speaking of which, I think we're both slightly in for it when we get home. You especially. Why me? Well, you know, your mama. What about her? Liesel was exercising the blatant right of every person who's ever belonged to a family. It's all very well for such a person to whine and moan and criticize other family members, but they won't let anyone else do it. That's when you get your back up and show loyalty. Is there something wrong with her? Rudy backed away. Sorry, Sawmensch, I didn't mean to offend you. Even in the night, Liesel could see that Rudy was growing. His face was lengthening, the blond shock of hair was darkening ever slightly, and his features seemed to be changing shape. But there was one thing that would never change. It was impossible to be angry at him for long. Students, stop and think for just a minute. Do you see anything to suggest that the relationship is changing some, that it, again, is growing? Remember, they're at this point in their early teens, and maybe they're beginning to have deeper feelings in some way. There's still that, Sawmensch, don't ask me for a kiss. But perhaps this is our writer's suggestion that they're beginning to care for each other more deeply. Now I've lost my place again. There I am. Anything good to eat at your place tonight? He asked. I doubt it. Me neither. It's a shame you can't eat books. Arthur Berg said something like that once, remember? They recounted the good old days for the remainder of the walk. Liesel often glancing down at the Whistler, at the gray cover and the black imprinted title. Before they went into their respective homes, Rudy stopped a moment and said, Goodbye, Sawmensch. He laughed. Good night, book thief. It was the first time Liesel had been branded with her title, and she couldn't hide the fact that she liked it very much. As we're both aware, she'd stolen books previously, but in late October 1941 it became official. That night, Liesel Meminger truly became the book thief. Think about this. This is the first actual time that she has been identified as a book thief, named the book thief by her good friend Rudy Steiner. Why does she like it very much? What do you think is going on? That this is something that gives her great delight. She's proud of this. And I want you to think about this idea. What do you think it has to do with finding your identity? Students, think about being a young teen, 12, 13, 14, even 15, even some of your ages still. You're just beginning to ask these questions about who you are and who are you becoming. I think these questions are very much in the minds of Liesel and Rudy, and for Liesel, who comes from much unhappiness and lives with much uncertainty and adventure, this idea of having this label, this name, the book thief, I think it's very important for her. This idea of young teens, that you're beginning to try out, to figure out who you are. Let me ask you this. What do you think Liesel is learning about herself? Okay, we'll stop there, and I'm going to ask you to write about that.